Okay, hello everybody. It's Sunday, May 26th. Jupiter has ingressed into Gemini along with Venus. I made my last video about this, and my apologies in that I don't, sometimes when I'm making this channel, sometimes I make videos that I personally don't think are as good as some of the other ones I make, and I have to admit, maybe sometimes I'm just kind of expressing some emotional stuff or whatever that I'm going through, and maybe it's not the best look, but there's something about doing these YouTube videos that I feel, like we select what we want to put into the videos and we omit other things, but at the end of the day we are whole people, and when something's affecting you, sometimes you can't keep it out so easily, right? But I don't know. I mean, sometimes there's certain things that I feel like I spend a lot of energy trying not to express certain things, and then I have got this avenue to express myself to people online, and however it works, I don't know. But there's certain dynamics going on with this ingress of Jupiter and Venus into Gemini, that are on my mind right now, and I was to lay it out for you. It has to do with Pluto in Aquarius, and the fact that Jupiter and Venus are now in an air sign, making this trine to Pluto in Aquarius, and the fact that, okay, so back in December 2020, we had the grand conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius, and that Aquarius usually has to do with things like systems. It's kind of a bit more maybe governmental. It also has to do a lot with science. Air signs in general, I think, have to do with this kind of like detached kind of intellectual thinking that has to do with science and technology, and that there's a kind of a you can look at the context of the COVID pandemic and the kinds of the way that so much more pressure was put on online life and the internet and technology, and at the same time you also saw a criticism coming up around something called technocracy, which is a kind of a loaded subject because it's like an idea that kind of like goes in all sorts of directions, which I think is maybe appropriate with Gemini, right? And I was basically thinking about doing this video talking about how the criticisms of the technocratic regime, or whatever you would say, may be set off by this Jupiter and Venus in Gemini trining Pluto and Aquarius, and also making a square to Saturn in Pisces. And there's a certain kind of work that I have to do with this topic to like unpack specifically where my stance on this whole issue is and how I relate to it and what I want to illuminate for people. And what I realize is that some of this may be kind of like dry and boring, or maybe kind of outside of what you would expect an astrology channel to get into. And so I kind of sketched out some ideas of where I'm going to go with this in this video. But before I get into the boring stuff, it crossed my mind that because of the influence of Venus and Jupiter here in this trine to Pluto, I can start this video off in a way that's maybe a bit less boring, right? And one of those things is that if you think about Jupiter, right? Jupiter, Zeus, being the patriarch of the Greek gods, right? That you had a pantheon of many different deities, and the old patriarch was Saturn, Kronos, and then Zeus came and replaced him as the lead. And so Zeus kind of stands for the sort of the ruler of the gods that instills a kind of providence or cosmic order, or karma that governs the whole the way that things work. Like everything follows this kind of divine order and divine providence, and yet there is a multiplicity of different Greek gods that all have their own interests, that all have, and Zeus is the one who's kind of in charge of like bringing a kind of an order to this whole like it's kind of a little bit chaotic with all these different gods and all these different forces, right? And so there's something about that, the way that Zeus stands for a kind of uniting principle, right? And then in Gemini has to do with, it's a Mercury ruled sign, so there's something to do with barter and exchange and communication and deal making, as well as this whole technology thing that comes up with the air signs and with the what I was talking about with Jupiter and Saturn, the grand conjunction that we had in 2020, and the so with all that in mind, there are certain things with when you bring Venus, obviously having to do with love and relationships and friendships. There is something that I would like to point out, that obviously this has already been brought up politically in the United States around Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook, and the question about whether or not Facebook has a monopoly, especially the fact that they also own Instagram. And Mark Zuckerberg tried to sort of make a pivot maneuver around this by calling the company Meta, and then saying that these other things that they do, like Facebook and Instagram, are just products of this parent company, right? And I mean, but this isn't really anything new, because you have these big conglomerate corporations that may own many different brands, and this is how, I mean, if you look at, different, like, whatever, like where you're, if you want to buy a candy bar, or if you want to buy cat food, or if you want to buy all sorts of things, you may find that what appears to be a diverse market of consumer choice actually turns out that one company owns all these things that look, that if you don't research into this, it looks like diversity, but really it's all owned by the same company, right? Now, one of the things that I find interesting about this, that I've heard people talk about it, but I don't get people talk about that much, is that if we move on from just Facebook and Instagram, if you look at the world of online dating apps, basically it may be different if you get into like Grindr or whatever, or some of the ones for gay people, but if you're looking at just like straight hetero dating apps, Tinder is obviously the most popular app, right? And you can look at the other some of the other choices that you might have available to you. And what I find interesting is that there's this idea that if you don't like, if one app doesn't work for you, or it's not quite your style, there's a whole range of these different dating apps to choose from. Well, there's this parent organization called Match Group, which is a American internet company out of Dallas, Texas. And this one company owns Tinder, Match.com, something called Meetic, which I've never heard before, OkCupid, Hinge, Plenty of Fish, OurTime, something I've never heard of, and even other dating global brands. So this one parent company owns tons of basically has a monopoly on the whole world of online dating, right? And now if you think about like what motivates people in life, right? That people, you have a certain degree of like volitional choice over like what motivates you in life, like the whole thing where you like choose your values, right? Like I value the principle of, community spirit and generosity and sharing with my, but like at the basic, at some point in time, you are driven by these biological drives to either reproduce or to have connection with other human beings, or to, whatever. Like to consciously choose not that you don't want to have connection with people, to consciously choose that you don't want to date people, to consciously choose to not have a sex drive or something like this. It's like, it's really hard, it's kind of involuntary because it's happening at a kind of a more instinctual level, right? And the old marketers back in the day basically saw these instinctual drives that we don't have much control over as a great way to manipulate people, basically, right? And why this is relevant is because Pluto basically is the planet in astrology which has come to be associated both with these base drives, like you have a fixed, like it's like life and death, right? You have to survive, and you know that there's things you have to do in order to survive, like it or not, right? And that is also wired into our reproductive system, right? Like we have some drive that we don't have conscious control over to reproduce, and also to partner up and all this kind of stuff. And there is, when you're really consumed by these unconscious drives, it may not be the first thing on your mind that the technologies that are in place to supposedly help you with this and make this process easier for you are all owned by one company. And like, we're talking about globally, right? Not just like one company in your area has a monopoly on the dating scene. We're talking about the whole world. The libido of the whole world is all basically profited off of by one company. And what's interesting too is that most of these services that they offer, that you don't even have to pay for them, which is kind of funny, right? But they make an extreme, like, you look at the way this is going, it's like, not only do you not have to pay for these services, but they basically make it, like the whole internet is based on this model where you get a lot of stuff for free, but they basically just help themselves to your data, right? So there's something about like for one thing, so you use these services, and then for whatever reason, your data, whatever you put into these things, whatever you put in your profile, even the messages you send to other people on this, and maybe your results of like whether you're successful in using dating apps or not, this is all feeding some data system. And there's something about this data which is profitable enough on its own that even if you don't pay any subscription and you are just either succeeding or not succeeding on dating apps, but you're feeding this data pool, like that's good enough. You're giving them, you're helping this company profit, because they can use this data to sell to other corporations, basically to find ways to manipulate you, right? And that's Pluto, right? Pluto is this sort of like, that's not what you're thinking about. You're just isolated, you're just lonely, maybe you're horny, but your first thing on your mind is probably not how are you going to get manipulated by the data that you're giving these people for free. And then there's something else which I find kind of interesting about this, is that we're under the pretense that like using these technologies can kind of make these problems in human life more easy, right? But it could very well be like, I don't know exactly how these algorithms work, right? But if you had, let's say, if the algorithm makes a calculation, like can somehow see the odds that there may be certain people that you would be compatible with, right? Or that would be more likely to go out on a date with you or something like that. And they have this whole subscription service where you can use it for free, but you have to pay a premium for some sort of like to boost yourself up in the algorithm. There could be a lot of people out there basically creating, like being kind of cheap, because like look at the economics right now. The cost of living is through the roof. Everything's really expensive. People are not in a position where if you can save money by not paying the premium on a dating app, you're probably going to be like, well, that's a great way for me to save expenses, right? But you could have the situation, I mean, hypothetically, that there could be all these people that could be great partners for you, but because you choose not to pay this premium, the app hides those people from you, and then instead shows you people that wouldn't be people you would be interested in, or people that wouldn't be compatible with you. And then you start to develop this idea that you're like, wait, like, I must not be the kind of person that is very compatible with people out there, or that, maybe I have to change something about myself to adapt to this circumstance, or that, like, you have this distorted perception of who you are, or what your chances are like, or what the dating pool is like, because you're not paying a premium, right? But at the same time, the whole idea of paying a premium for a dating app is kind of strange, because it's like, you might pay a subscription for like Netflix or something like that, but like as the years go by and all the changes in your life, you're still watching movies and you're still but like when it comes, the whole point of dating usually is that you're trying to, like, unless you're just like having a lot of little like flings or casual sex or something like that, the idea is usually that people want to meet a partner and not just be stuck on a dating app month after month after month after month. You want to actually find somebody you're compatible. That's like usually what the pretense is, right? I think, right? But like the whole premise of like, there's something weird about like, it's you, by paying the premium, you may have access to all these people that you wouldn't have access to anyways, but then you are creating some sort of identity for yourself as being like, oh, if you pay a premium, you must be somebody who just wants to have a lot of casual sex, and you look like a kind of a sleazebag. Like, isn't it kind of sleazy to be like, I've got the gold, top premium, so like as soon as anybody wants to have sex with me, I know about it. Right? Like, isn't that kind of weird? Like, when, like, it's kind of what do you have to do to get to that point where you're going to invest all this money into having a premium dating app account, right? And then, similarly, if you don't want to go that direction with it with the dating apps, there's this whole other avenue that I don't hear people talk about that much, which is basically like pornography. Maybe you just give in and you want to just watch some porn or something like this, right? Did you know that the most popular pornography website, Pornhub, is a monopoly as well, similar to the dating apps? And there's like, if you try to look for some other way to find like pornography on the internet, chances are it's owned by the same people, right? So you've got basically one monopoly over dating, another monopoly over pornography, and then when you've got social media, you've got Facebook and Instagram, another monopoly, and is there any, like, aside from using like Twitter or something, I don't know, like, is there really any competition to Facebook and Instagram? Is there any real competition to like Tinder and Hinge? Like, we have these like overlords which have set them up, and if you want to make friends, if you want to find a date, if you even want to just use pornography, you've got people who are finding ways that even if you don't pay money for this, you are giving your data to these people and feeding a kind of a data economy, which they will in turn use to either psychologically manipulate you, or basically, I don't know, whatever it is. If there's some way that your data is valuable to some other person that's really rich and has a monopoly, they're going to pay for it and find. And the thing with Pluto is it's not transparent. It's all hidden. We don't know what the fuck they're doing with this data, but we know that it's profitable enough that they don't care if they don't care if you don't pay for any of this stuff, right? Which is kind of fucked up, basically, right? And I'm thinking all this stuff is very relevant to Venus and Jupiter trining Pluto in Aquarius, right? Now, so that concludes what I have to say. This is with Venus and Jupiter. I'm putting this stuff at the beginning because I think it's maybe a little bit more exciting, a little bit more stimulating. Whereas The rest of this may be kind of dry, and like it may not, it may not be as interesting for you, right? So hold on. I'm just gonna take a breath, a breather, before I get into the second part of my video. Yeah. We can play some intermission music or something. Okay. So one of the things that I have been doing on this channel is that I have often made a kind of reference to the idea of being apolitical, and then oftentimes when I try to reference my apolitical position, I kind of get confused because I'm not. It's not that I'm like completely politically neutral, but there's this whole issue around the political landscape online, and then how that colors, like if you try to live your, like the whole thing about like what Marshall McLuhan was talking about, when like Marshall McLuhan was talking mainly in the 60s about the recent media developments with things like television and the radio. And Marshall McLuhan was saying in an interview when people were asking, like, is the point of this, saying that like TV is a bad influence or that radio is a bad influence, and you just need to like, go to be like an Amish commune and like and completely eliminate technology. And he's saying like the point is that even if you well, I mean, I guess in that situation, if you really run away from civilization and start your own little Amish community, maybe that would work, right? But the fact is, even if you choose not to use, if you choose to not to use these things like social media, dating apps, whatever, like we are in a society that if you were just surrounded by other people whose perceptions of reality are or in their political opinions or whatever, they're all, or the data that they put into all this stuff is being fed to some shadowy buyer who is then using said data to coerce and manipulate and push people in different directions. Even if you choose to opt out of this, you have no choice but to coexist in the society that is shaped by these forces, right? And so a lot of my whole thing about the political position is like running into, like, I don't want to be completely isolated. Like, there's this other thing though. One of the things that my other video, I have to admit that part of it was like complaining a little bit about social isolation, or that the people, because I was doing this whole thing because of my past history with radical mental health scene, or like I just like having these friends who are all a bit kind of unstable that I kind of get burnt out by, and not being able to transition in different social circle or whatever, right? But there's another side of it, right? Is the fact that like I live with my mother and my sister, right? And the thing is that they have this certain like centrist, leftist, democratic, socialist outlook on things. And the thing is, like, if in my efforts to try to like, socialize outside of just with my, living at home with my family, I tend to run into people who have different points of view, right? And there might be like, you want to either understand where these people are coming from, or basically, like, if the whole thing about like, I can't, or like even if I'm not like socializing in person, if I'm just dealing with people on the internet, I can't help but realize that the position of being a kind of a well-to-do, good-intentioned white liberal is not like, you eventually run into a bit of friction, a bit of like kind of seeing that like there are other perspectives that you can kind of like see. But the thing, I can't really there's a certain social climate with my family that they don't want to have like arguments about. You just want to talk. You want to keep it to things where everything's just calm and chill and everything. But like it's like you don't want to be like. I don't want to be basically like socially isolated and socialize in a certain way where I basically just agree with my family about everything and live in a kind of like innocent, naive, kind of like docile, like, you know, I just agree with my mom about everything she thinks and my sister about everything she thinks, and I don't have any friends. I don't socialize at all. So if I ever do talk to, I don't. People are like completely alien to me. like who knows? Like I'm just there's something about that circumstance which is like, you know, of being completely alienated from the rest of people, and the rest of people having really like extremist political ideologies, and being like, so not only is it like do I feel like, you know, and meanwhile I have to like model my personality in such a way that I can't have any disagreements or arguments or conversations that have room for exploring different avenues with my family, because they just don't they can't handle that, right? And also the same thing is online, that nobody actually wants to like have discourse or arguments or disagreements. So you basically just have to like treat everybody in this really like, you know, everybody's right, and like we're not going to disagree about everything, and like, and there are all these people with these weird extremist beliefs, and they're just wacky, and like when you try to like, if you try to like actually make friends with anybody, you just feel like a complete alien because you're completely not socialized to it, right? But that doesn't necessarily mean that these wacky extremist people are right. You know what I'm saying? But this is the whole conversation seems to swing around this whole thing about like what's the acceptable kind of liberal centrism or whatever, and what is maybe I'm getting off track. Well, my point though is that one of the issues around all this is that sometimes I try to bring this up in conversation with my mom, but I don't think she's like equipped to understand the problem very well. And part of like my mother worked for the Trudeau government in the 70s. Not Justin Trudeau, his dad Pierre Trudeau in the 70s, and she basically people have to take this issue with something called like technocratic bureaucracy, right? And before just saying that this thing, if you talk about like technocratic bureaucracy in general is a bad thing, it usually gets a bad rap because if you think about like the movie Brazil by Terry Gilliam, it's like an example of like when everything is bogged down in so much bureaucracy and paperwork and doing everything by the book that you can't get anything done. And like if you have like a problem where you need to hire a plumber, they have this guy who's like the anarchist like plumber who's gonna go bypass all the red tape and the paperwork to go in and like fix your pipes, and it's like to actually do anything to get any, like that's one reason why people don't like bureaucracy, is because it ends up being like a very cumbersome machine, right? And and you can see this too with like there's something about like the even if there's things that are good, even if you agree that people should have access to like something like public health care or something like that. Like I had some health problems a couple of years ago that I'm recovering from, and I'm doing better now. But when I was in the hospital, I could just see there was this time where like I was on I was under strict orders not to eat anything until the doctor signed off that I would be okay to eat, right? And the thing is, it's like in that, like I'm just giving this as an example, right? Like in that situation, like, and you can imagine that, like, because I was having problems with my I don't need to get into all my my problems or whatever. Right? I mean, I don't need to get into the nitty gritty of my health details. But I was under like I had to wait for a doctor to give the there's this, on one hand there is the actual reality of your health, of what's going on in your body, and in that moment, if you were given food, would it be good or bad, or would it be better not to give the person food right now? And let's just assume in this case that it was like your from that level, it is actually okay for your body to get food, but you need to have the person who is the expert to sign off on it that it's okay, right? Now this person has a lot of work to do, right? And this person like has to sign off on a lot of things, right? And because it's public health care, there is a wait list of like tons of people that need to do. So like you could very well have breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but because there's all this bureaucracy, you're going to have to basically starve for 24 hours because you're going to have to wait for this guy to sign off. It doesn't have anything to do, like, you could very well eat this food and, like, it's no problem, but you have to, we have to, everything's tied up with bureaucracy. And this is one of the things that, I mean, but the thing is, if what happens if a nurse just says, oh, it's probably going to be fine, I'll give you the food anyways, and then it turns out you're wrong, and then the doctor's like, who? I didn't sign for this yet. And then the nurse has to be fired, and this is what doing things by the book, how it works, right? So there's that basic side of it of why bureaucracy gets a bad rap in the first place, which it should just be maybe it's self-explanatory. Maybe I don't have to explain this, right? But the thing about Justin Trudeau and politics, and I'm taking an apolitical position, like I'm not taking a position of partisan politics here, where to say that because I don't like Trudeau, it means I like Pierre Poilievre or whatever. I'm not taking that direction with it. The point here is that there's something kind of like, especially using YouTube and social media, and there's this whole climate in Canada of like people putting like fuck Trudeau stickers on their black pickup trucks, and a lot of hate and animosity directed specifically at Trudeau. And I have to admit that I am not like, it's like there's something, it's like I'm tempted actually to be defensive of Trudeau, but the thing is, the truth is I don't actually like him either, right? But it's a touchy subject, but the basic point that I want to make here is that I think there's a kind of a I have my own reasons for not liking Trudeau, and for me personally, it has a lot to do with the CNC Lavalin controversy, which I'll link, but I don't hear that brought up very much anymore. Like, it's kind of like old news, right? There's like a lot of politicians are fucked, right? Like, no matter who you elect, there's probably going to be something wrong with them, right? But the point is that there is something that has less to do with with Justin Trudeau, and more to do with the structure of this form of what I'm calling bureaucratic technocracy, in that if you look at Canada's economic problems, there's this tendency. First of all, most of this media, that if you get media where people are like videos that have been boosted up to your newsfeed, probably because some guy with a lot of money is paying for some kind of bot army to artificially inflate certain things over others, or there are right-wing think tanks that intentionally try to push certain narratives or certain kinds of attitudes into the mainstream artificially, right? Which could be part of this, right? But a lot of this has to do with focusing on making Justin Trudeau the problem, suggesting that if we just elect Pierre Poilievre, like the conservative leader, he's going to do a much better job with it, right? Or that there's this idea that like the financial economic problems that we're facing in Canada, basically the style of politics, which is probably fueled and funded by these right-wing think tanks, basically has this pattern of being like the groceries are really expensive, the gas is really expensive, all this stuff, everybody's struggling, and the reason is because this one guy who is the leader of the country is doing a bad job. And if we had a different guy in there, namely the guys that we support, they would do a better job, right? And that there's something about this that is, like in another video that I made, made a link to an Australian punk rock band called the Drunk Mums, who were basically making a video, doing a song, complaining about similar problems with the cost of living and the frustration of the economy in Australia, right? And what I found is interesting is that eventually the YouTube algorithm gave me a video talking about the economy of Australia and the economy of Canada, and why the reason why Australia and Canada have very similar economies is due to geopolitical dynamics, where the USA, America, is a much stronger economic power than Canada is. Canada only has there's more people that live in California than people that live in Canada, right? And so Canada's economy is generally, the stuff that makes the most money out of Canada's economy is providing resources. Namely, we've got the Alberta tar sands, and we've got a lot of, there's a lot of forestry going on in Canada, that we supply the United States with raw materials. And we can also build hydroelectric dams and stuff like that, and produce more energy than what's necessary for our meager little population, and then sell the excess energy that we're producing to America. So basically, what the whole Canadian political economic position of what makes Canada strong or weak, really, the thing is, whether you elect a conservative leader or a liberal leader or a leftist leader or whatever, it probably doesn't make a lot of difference in respect to the fact that mainly this person is there to manage the relationship that we have with America, and that has to do with things like it gets kind of funny to me, because when you think about whatever right wing and left wing or liberal and conservative is supposed to mean, like conservative, people often think about conservative as being attached to this kind of laissez-faire economic policy, right? Where you want to be like you want to restrain the government influence. Instead of having a bloated government, instead of having lots of rules and regulations, you want to minimize the government and then leave it open to big business, right? But if you look at the way the right wing actually works, like if you take a look at what was happening during the Donald Trump years, Donald Trump was really big on the tariffs and the basically creating trade wars by trying to put all this economic pressure on the people that you're trading with and stuff like this, right? And so the thing is, it's like the right wing people aren't really conservative in that sense. In a way, they really try to use their muscle, right? They're going to really use their muscle in terms of using things like tariffs and trade war dynamics to muscle the other countries into submission and having power. And so basically what happens is our politicians end up being more like managers of these trade wars. And also, there's this kind of thing about like, we end up dealing with like, the issue of debt, basically, right? And the whole problem about like the economic crisis in Canada and everybody feeling poor and broke is that Trudeau is basically he doesn't what is he going to do aside, he's basically working with these big banks and lending, it's like there's this really complicated thing where you get into financial derivatives, right? Where you're trying to basically make some sort of deal where you're going to borrow a whole bunch of money. Like, I'm not an economist. There's another, I can link another video in the comments that I was watching where a guy who is more of an economist is explaining this. But you get into these really complex, like, the part of things, I think this is intentionally made to be so complicated that if you were actually literate, like, if you were somebody who's going to be like, I'm going to train to understand the economics, to train myself to understand these really complicated financial systems of managing debts and derivatives and stocks and bonds and stuff like that. Like, if you were to, like, I find anyways that I often hit this wall where, like, I understand things up to a point, but it starts to get so complicated that you're like, this is obviously just fucked. Like, instead of, like, we're not, like, all we're doing is, like, taking one debt and then taking debt, moving it over here, and moving this stuff over here, and it's like this kind of thing. Like, even your banks, like, yeah, it's just like we're going to offset this money we owe by borrowing more money, and then I don't know. It's like, I'm not an economist, but it's kind of fucked up, basically, right? But I was watching this video by a guy, David Graeber, called "Debt: The First 5,000 Years," and he was kind of like, maybe I'll link that in the description too. But it's the question of, like, the problem of this liberal technocracy is that like, there's this whole dynamic where it's like, don't shoot the messenger, right? Where, like, people are frustrated because we're in this economic situation, and the best, like, we have these politicians where the best they can do is basically go to the bank, and it's like the equivalent of, like, trying to remortgage your house or make some sort of deal on, like, I can't pay my debts. How can we pay our debt? Like, can we make some sort of agreement that makes it easier for Canadians to borrow money and keep this there's this basically infinite debt that is completely, it's crazy because, like, capitalism is unhinged, right? That, like, you may have a limited amount of trees, you may have a limited amount of oil, you may have environmental impacts that are caused by exploiting these resources, and yet we have the system of debt where, like, the sky is the limit. You can just you can just have infinite amounts of debt that, like, and make some sort of deal that at some point in the future we're going to try to pay this off. But and the whole point is that there are, David Graeber was famous for this line that's like, the truth is that the world we live in is something that we create, and we could just as easily create it differently, right? But we take this whole system of debt, of this weird financial system, as being just a given, and that at a democratic level, the politicians that basically the people are making this, like, even the right-wing politicians who are critical of Trudeau aren't criticizing the structure system of the world banking system and all this debt. They're basically just saying that, like, if you hire our politician, you would be hiring a debt manager who would make better deals on how to manage this debt, but it's still not really correcting the problem. It's so the thing is, like, the idea is by using democracy, the people have a say in the way that society is structured, but the actual structuring of society is happening at a level that's way beyond the level of anything that you could elect somebody that would have any kind of say in it, right? And, like, basically, like, David Graeber in this talk, which I have to be honest, I only watched half the talk or whatever. It's still a good one though. It's about his book, Debt: The First 5,000 Years. He's basically making this argument that, our understanding of history and our understanding, like, debt and credit has been part of how we did things for a long time, but we used to be much more common to forgive debts. He was saying that even there's this whole even, like, spiritual or religious dimension to it, where apparently what gets, like, the forgive us our trespasses as we forgive others who trespass, that they're the actual aromatic, that sin and debt is the same word, right? That if you are to forgive somebody of their sins is like forgiving somebody of their debts, right? And this idea that there's a moral dimension to being in debt, right? And he gives this example of like, oh, whatever. You might as well just watch David Graeber talk about it, right? But there's this thing about like we've created this situation where the system of accounting and a system of debt collection, and that thing has become solidified into like because it's like just like you like if you've got some government official that says we owe this much money and then we have to pay it back, and don't shoot the messenger because I'm just relaying to you the objective. This is what the numbers are, right? The numbers represent this thing that is like, it's math, right? And like mathematics is what's real, right? And debt is what's real. And we don't have any choice over it because this is just what it's in the books. We got to pay it off, right? Like we have this idea that the bureaucratic technocracy represents as the system of accounting that is completely superior to anything that we have any say in, like, controlling, right? And he's saying that like when America first started, right, the founding fathers, like, originally they didn't think democracy was going to work because they thought if you actually had a democratic free society, the people would just would run on the platform like, we're going to forgive all the debts. We're just going to dissolve all the debts, and then we're going to correct the wealth inequality, and we're going to redistribute the land. And it's like the democracy was considered to be too dangerous because, like, why not just do that, right? But the solution basically has been that we have a system of democracy that people don't vote. Nobody in Canada goes out and votes. It doesn't really, like, there's this whole thing. It's really funny that, like, oh man, this astrologer lady that was like, during the time when I was in the hospital, this astrologer lady was making, her prediction was that Justin Trudeau was going to lose the election, the last federal election that we had. Because, I can kind of see where she was coming from, because I saw a lot of these fuck Trudeau stickers. I saw a lot of these loud and angry protesters or people that didn't like Trudeau. But they didn't have any, like, I think Trudeau did not really suffer that big of a, he may have lost a few, the Liberals may have lost a few seats in that election. She was wrong, basically. Trudeau firmly held on to power, right? There are a lot of people that can be very loudly vocal against Trudeau. I think there's a dissatisfaction with a political system where the most we can do is be like, we have this huge debt and we basically have to send this, like, it's like, to me it sounds a lot like daddy issues, right? It's like people, rather than actually being able to coherently, intelligently address the problems, we basically are like, this guy who's the leader of our country is full of shit, and we need a better daddy to go and work out our mortgage deal with the bank. Because if we had a strong masculine daddy figure, he'd be able to go in there and tell those bankers, he'd be able to work out a better deal with the bank. Like, there's no way of actually looking at the way we structure our society with debts and being able to have any say over that. All it is just like, which daddy do you think is going to be a better, and this is why it's scary, because it starts to be like fascism, right? It's like, we need a strong male leader to really, if that's all it is, that's all you have choice over, right? It's like, you can't think, and you're too busy being a hard-working man, being a strong dad for your kids or whatever, that you don't have time to think about all this intellectual bullshit, right? Like, you just need to, who's the strong daddy that's going to be there to stand up to the banks? And meanwhile, we don't have any way to even address the issue of the banking system itself, right? And that, I think, is something that's going to be highlighted in the astrology, because you're going to have this Saturn and Jupiter square, right? That was this is the opening square of the grand conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius, and Aquarius is all about this systematic level of this kind of like scientific, systematic organization of bureaucracy and accounting and with Mercury, you know, the scribe, keeping track of all the numbers and all the details. And this is at the same time they're keeping track of all the data they get from you on dating apps. They're keeping track of all the data they get from you on your social media, and they're keeping track of your credit scores and all this. And the most we can do is be like, so who's the daddy we're gonna send to the bank to try to negotiate a better deal? And it doesn't, like, if you've got fucking an infinite amount of pile of debt over your head, you're fucked either way. It doesn't really matter. And the whole thing about people are afraid of people got their panties in a knot because of like Justin Trudeau's Online Harms Act. What do you think Pierre Poilievre is going to do about this? Pierre Poilievre has this idea that he wants to make it so that like you're not going to be able to go on Pornhub without signing in first, and everything that you watch on your computer is going to get put into this huge data system. So they're going to have, like, the government's going to know exactly what your kinks are. They're going to know exactly where your neurosis is. If you're going to have some sort of like thing you're insecure about, some kind of vulnerability, the Conservative Party is going to have that on this database. So they're going to be like, you know, knowing exactly what buttons to push that are going to make you freak out and like become a political extremist. And they're going to have an inventory of your site. And you think that the fucking voting for the Conservatives is going to be any better than Trudeau? Like, you know, you're in for, you got another thing coming. Okay, so this is what I have to say for Jupiter and Venus in a trine to Pluto and Aquarius. Thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe. Thanks for supporting the channel. Thank you very much.